Nobody really knows the answer to any of these questions, but does it make sense for either side, given the economic difficulties we're all facing, given the conflict in Ukraine, given the cost of living crisis? No, it doesn't make sense. So could you please stop threatening each other? Could you get round the table, look seriously at proposals, and try and reach an agreement?
Now delighted to be joined by two guests. We have Hilary Benn, Labour MP, former Shadow Foreign Secretary and Vice Chair of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, and the Conservative peer, Lord Moylan. Good afternoon to both of you, gentlemen. Thanks very much for your time. Lord Moylan, I'll start with you. Why has the protocol become so problematic, and what would you like to see the government do?
Well, it's been problematic from the outset, and I'm not going to talk about the difficulties it's caused to businesses because I don't have direct experience of that. And I'm not going to talk immediately about the sharpening of conflict, if you like, or disagreement between the communities, which has led now to the Assembly and the Executive not being able to operate because you have people who could get on who know the internal mechanisms of Northern Irish politics much better than me. So I'll just focus on a couple of things. What the protocol does, first of all, it really raises a question about human rights and about the right to elect the people who make laws for you, because Northern Ireland is now the only part of Europe that isn't militarily occupied. I mean, the only part of Europe where the people are now subject to foreign laws with no say, interpreted by a foreign court in which they have no jurisdiction. That's a real question about human rights that should never have arisen. And the second is that it really is an attack on our own union, our own United Kingdom. We are a single country. We left the European Union as a single country. We were legally entitled to do that. But now we have this barrier to trade and to all the other things that, go on within a single country that has been created by the protocol. So it's fundamentally flawed and needs to be renegotiated from scratch.
And in terms of there has to be some kind of border, where would you like to see that border?
Well, the border already exists in effect between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the question is, where do you do the checks? And it is possible we could collaborate with the European Union so that goods that were destined for the Republic and therefore potentially going on to the rest of the European Union, goods and food, could be checked in Northern Irish territory. But that doesn't mean to say that everything that goes into Northern Ireland, down to biscuits, pet passports, second-hand cars, everything has to be treated as if it's a foreign import into the EU. And it doesn't mean EU law has to take precedence in Northern Ireland. So I would say, in a sense, it's not for me to suggest, it would be impertinent for me to tell the European Union how to defend their own external border. But I think what Britain should be saying is that when we can work out a system, and we will be as helpful as possible in enforcing that, collaborating with you. And that's really what we should have said from the outset.
And in terms of the options on the table, Lord Moylan, which do you favour? Do you think the government should continue to get round the table? Do you think it should be triggering Article 16? Or do you think we should be seeing this legislation, although it looks like this legislation is not going to happen?
Well, of course, we should always be ready to sit round a table with the European Union at any time. I mean, the trouble is they haven't been willing to sit round a table with us and talk about the proposals we put to them last July. They've simply blanked them out. But what the British government wants was set out very clearly last July in a public document. We can all read it. It was supported by some legal text, we understand, that's what the government says, which was sent to them a few weeks later, which hasn't been published, so we don't know what the legal text says. We've had no comeback on that at all from the European Union. That's the course I think we have to pursue. It's clear that there can be no role for the European Court of Justice. That was explained last July. And that's what we should be doing. And we need to take the measures to do that because the situation politically, the internal politics of Northern Ireland, is now such that the Good Friday Agreement's under real threat. And remember, the purpose, despite what Anand said earlier, the purpose of the Northern Ireland Protocol was primarily to protect the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, and only secondarily was it about the border and how you man and manage the border.
I'll just come to Hilary Benn in a second. A couple of questions have just come in saying that the people of Northern Ireland, Lord Moylan, they've actually voted to remain, but also this was a deal really trumpeted by the Prime Minister. Christmas Eve 2019, he said this was an excellent deal. This was a really, really good workable solution.
Yeah, well, it's turned out not to be, and I think this is what I call, if you like, the Yaboo sucks argument, which says you signed it, so the people of Northern Ireland are stuck with it. No, you signed it, so it's your job to fix it. And if it's not working, it falls on the government to fix it. And just saying whose fault it was at the time and pointing fingers is it's fun political point scoring for people who do it, but it isn't actually addressing the present injustices of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It isn't addressing the question of human rights. It isn't addressing the question of who elects the people who make your laws. It isn't addressing the damage done to the Union. It isn't putting the Good Friday Agreement back together again. And it isn't resolving problems, unnecessary problems, in the economy that are affecting businesses and consumers.
Hilary Benn, I'll bring you in now. You've listened to Lord Moylan. He makes a strong point about human rights, about the inability to get the government up and running, and the threat to the Union and the Good Friday Agreement. On that basis, isn't it right that the EU does flex a bit as well and get back round the table with the UK government?
Yes, it is right. I mean, look, let's be honest. There's a very torrid history to this protocol, and tempting though it may be to point out that our current Prime Minister said at one point, he would never ever agree to this, and then promptly did so when he went into number 10. That is really by the by now, because we have a practical political problem facing us. And at the heart of it is the issue that the negotiation of the protocol never resolved. Because what they said was, we need to determine which goods are at risk, having arrived in Northern Ireland, of then moving on into the Republic of Ireland and onwards to other countries of the EU. And it was left to what's called the Joint Committee to reach agreement on that. And ultimately, as Lord Moylan said, you need to be able to distinguish between the two. So if you take the very practical example of the lorries that bring goods to supermarkets in Northern Ireland, they cross from Cairnryan mainly to Larne or Belfast every single day. They only have shops in Northern Ireland. They don't sell in the Republic of Ireland. And I would argue, why do you actually need to check those when they're just going to be in shops in Strabane or Londonderry or Belfast? Now, the EU's moved a bit on that. They were originally saying you've got to have an export health certificate for every one of the items, hundreds of them in the back of the lorry. Then they said, well, OK, you can have just one, but we'll need supporting documentation which contributes to the one export health certificate. I don't think that makes myself a lot of sense. And the thing we should hang on to is that the EU has already shown its willingness to set aside the rules as the rules approach, which is what they did over medicines. Because under the protocol, if you'd applied it fully, then no medicines could be given to NHS patients in Northern Ireland unless they had been through certification by the European Medicines Agency. And Maros Sefcovic, the commissioner, to his great credit, realised this is ridiculous. These are NHS patients in NHS hospitals in the United Kingdom. We cannot stop them getting medicines. And
Hilary, we slightly just lost you there. We lost the last sentence. Can you hear us?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you still hear me?
Yes, just repeat your last sentence.
Sorry, the last point was that he realised, Maros Sefcovic, that you couldn't realistically stop NHS medicines getting to patients in Northern Ireland. So he changed EU law. And if you can do it for medicines, you can do it on other things. And there has to be a compromise in the middle, let's be honest about this. And the UK government threatening to try and set aside parts of the protocol is not going to help, and that is not the right approach. But at the same time, I think the EU has got to move further, because in the end, this is a political problem to do with the peace process in Northern Ireland. The fact, as Lord Moylan has rightly pointed out, the Assembly and the executive are not functioning at the moment. So there is no effective self-government in Northern Ireland. And it requires a political solution to what is a political problem. And frankly, we've got far more important things to be working on, cooperating on with Europe. The war in Ukraine. Are we really going to be brought low by parcels, supermarket deliveries, seed potatoes, and kosher food and parcels. It really doesn't make any sense to me.
So, Hilary, in terms of the options on the table, then, I mean, so you and actually Lord Moylan seem to be in quite a lot of agreement. Lord Moylan, it looks quite surprised at that. Lord Moylan, I mean, Hilary Benn is saying not dissimilar points to you that both sides have to get back round the table.
Yes, and he's right. In what he says, he's right, but he's too limited. You have to ask other questions. You have to ask yourself the question, why do VAT rates in Northern Ireland have to be set by the European Union? Why is it we can't cut VAT on fuel in Northern Ireland, which we could elsewhere? Why is it that state aid rules in Northern Ireland mean that the COVID help that Britain is now proposing for Britain, the subsidies for businesses to help them through COVID have to meet European Union law if they're given to Northern Ireland businesses. So it isn't. He's right about what he says, but it simply doesn't go far enough. The question what to do about it. We'll both agree, I'm sure, that talking to the European Union is the right thing to do and to keep talking. The question is in what framework. Our proposals have not been addressed. They've not been engaged with by the European Union. It's in the European Union's interest to keep the whole thing rolling on and rolling on and rolling on until we just give up. I don't think we can afford to let it give up, to let the whole thing go and to give it up. And I think we are going to have to take some action. Of the two, as Anand explained, Article 16, if we invoked it, which is a perfectly lawful thing to do, would simply lead to more talks, as Anand said earlier. I think we're beyond that now. I think we have to show that we're willing to govern the whole of the United Kingdom in the interests of the people of the United Kingdom, an elected government doing that, an accountable government, making the laws for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's what we're going to be willing to do.
So you're keen on passing legislation?
I think we should, I think we should move towards raising some very serious questions about the fundamentals of the protocol.
And what about the prospect of a trade war, which could then be very damaging as we're coming through the pandemic, cost of living crisis? There's lots of briefings in the paper today that saying actually there's a lot of, upset from sections of the Treasury that this does seem to be escalating to the point where we're talking about a trade war.
Well, I mean, trade war, I think, goes a bit beyond this. But there'll be different views on this, and we won't know until it happens. Some people will say any disagreement or any perturbation to the trade and cooperation agreement we signed a year after the withdrawal agreement, any perturbation to that is going to be absolutely catastrophic. The whole country will fall to pieces and we'll be in destitution. And there'll be other people who say that, first of all, the European Union is only entitled to take action which is proportionate to the damage they suffer. And since nobody can actually identify any damage from the occasional possibility of a sausage ending up in County Cavan, a British sausage ending up in County Cavan, since nobody can really identify much, they wouldn't be legally entitled to do very much about it. And the second thing is, of course, the trade and cooperation agreement which we signed is in fact more favourable to the European Union than to us, because they sell us far more goods than we sell to them. And it's a treaty about goods. And of course, they have access to our fisheries, which they would lose if they cancel the TCA.
Hilary Benn, do you want to come back to that? What is the realistic prospect of, is it realistic that you think the government will introduce legislation to override parts of the protocol? And what do you think would be the realistic and proportionate response in terms of retaliation from the EU?
The honest answer to your first question, Aisha, is I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, because you open the paper every morning and you read something different. First it was going to be Article 16, then there would be a bill. Now they're saying, well, there might be a bill, but it could take longer to put into legislation. I don't know what the thinking is. But in the meantime, there is a problem for the people of Northern Ireland, and politicians on this side of the channel and the other side have a responsibility to go and do their job and to find a way through this, because I'm absolutely convinced it is possible to do that. Secondly, if we unilaterally set aside part of an international treaty that the United Kingdom entered into, signed, and as we heard earlier, extolled the virtues of, well, the EU would probably take a pretty dim view of that. And ultimately, it's up to them to decide in what way they seek to retaliate. And they could apply, for example, selective tariffs to certain British goods. We sell when I last looked at the figures, just under 2,000 cars a day from the UK to the EU. It's a very important market for British car makers. If you put a 10% tariff on that, then that would have an impact on British car manufacturers and the jobs that support it. So nobody really knows the answer to any of these questions, but does it make sense for either side, given the economic difficulties we're all facing, given the conflict in Ukraine, given the cost of living crisis? No, it doesn't make sense. So could you please stop threatening each other? Could you get round the table, look seriously at proposals, and try and reach an agreement? Now, ultimately, the test of whether an agreement works or not is whether the DUP will lift their unwillingness to allow the Assembly to meet or to take the Deputy Minister post now that Sinn Féin have won a majority of seats. And again, only the DUP know the answer to that question. What would it take?
Now, I've got one, we're very late to the news, but I just got one question I want to put to both of you quickly because I do think it's important. And there have been reports that, of course, America is watching this very closely as well. Some talk of the idea of a Northern Ireland envoy being created. Your thoughts on that quickly, please, Lord Moylan.
Well, I think America had a very important role in establishing the Good Friday Agreement, and a helpful envoy would actually be quite helpful in all of this. The difficulty there, of course, is that, in November we could have a Congress of a completely different, are likely to have a Congress of a completely different colour. So politics in America changes too, and you don't know what you're going to get by way of an envoy. So I think, but a neutral, helpful person, fine, they can help. They can help, but they've got to understand what the problems are. And that these are solutions that nobody in the United States would accept for the United States, having your laws made elsewhere and having a court that decides what you're doing outside the United States. Nobody would accept that.
Okay, Hilary?
Well, look, if it helps to bang heads together to end this squabble and to get an agreement, then I think that would be a good thing. But it's obviously a matter for the United States of America. But as long as there are problems in the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, or the Americans think in particular that the actions of the UK government are in some way threatening that, I tell you, we'll be waiting a long time for that much talked about, but so far undelivered trade deal with the United States of America.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your time. My huge thanks to the Conservative peer, Lord Moylan, and to the Labour MP, Hilary Benn.